Hey everyone, welcome back, ready for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling a mystery that's fascinated people for, well, close to a century now. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart.
A mystery for the ages.
Absolutely. And to guide us through the twists and turns, we've got a really interesting YouTube video from the Valdar channel called The Overlooked Clues of Amelia Earhart's Last Flight.
Oh yeah, I've seen that one. Definitely some thought-provoking stuff in there.
For sure. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of her final flight, let's take a step back. What made Amelia Earhart such a legend even before this fateful journey? What set her apart?
Well, she was way more than just a pilot. I mean, she was a true pioneer, someone who shattered expectations, pushed boundaries. Her passion for aviation, it actually started pretty early.
Oh yeah, how so?
A simple childhood experience, a ride at an aerial show, sparked something in her, I guess. But it wasn't just a fleeting fascination. She ended up becoming a passenger on the first transatlantic flight by a woman. And that's where things get really interesting. Instead of just enjoying the ride, she was like, hey, I could do that myself and better.
Talk about setting the bar high. So she decides to pilot her own transatlantic flight, and what happens?
Well, her 1932 solo flight was anything but easy. Imagine battling fatigue, a leaky fuel tank. Oh, and a cracked manifold stewing flames.
Yikes. That's a bit more than turbulence.
Right. And then, as if that was enough, icy conditions sent her plane into a terrifying tailspin.
I can't even imagine most pilots would have turned back, right?
You'd think so, but not Earhart. Nope, she fought through every obstacle and landed in Ireland, setting multiple records in the process and, cementing her place in aviation history.
Wow. That flight alone speaks volumes about her determination.
Yeah.
And her resilience.
Absolutely. Qualities that would become even more crucial later on, as we'll see.
Okay, so we've got this fearless pilot who's already made history. What was it about the 1937 world flight that drew her in?
Well, it was the ultimate challenge, right? To become the first woman to circumnavigate the globe by air. And it seems like an ambition that really resonated with her. She even said, I have a feeling that there is just about one more good flight left in my system.
Wow. Almost like a premonition.
It's kind of eerie, right?
For sure. So I imagine the planning for a journey like that was incredibly intense.
Oh, absolutely. Meticulous. Earhart and her team, they put together a top-notch crew, got themselves a specially modified Lockheed Electra 10E, and developed a multi-stage flight plan. They were leaving nothing to chance, or so they thought.
So where do things start to go wrong? I know the video mentioned a crash in Hawaii.
Yeah, during takeoff from Hawaii, they had a crash that damaged the aircraft. So more repairs, more fundraising, more delays. And on top of that, weather conditions forced them to adjust their route. Another layer of complexity to what was already a pretty challenging journey. Got it. Delays, a damaged plane, a revised route. Things aren't exactly off to a smooth start. And their ultimate destination, Howland Island, it seems like that plays a significant role in the mystery, right?
Huge role. Finding Howland Island, it was basically like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Except the haystack is the entire Pacific Ocean. Imagine this tiny speck of land just 6,500 feet long and barely 20 feet above the waves. Spotting that from the air, even with the best technology of the time, that was a massive challenge.
Wow, I didn't realize how small and isolated it really was. So how were they even planning to navigate to this tiny island in the middle of nowhere?
Well, Earhart and her navigator, friend Noonan, weren't just relying on luck. They had multiple backup plans. Celestial navigation, using the stars to figure out their position, radio communication with the Coast Guard cutter Itasca, which was stationed near Howland to guide them, and they even had emergency ditching procedures, just in case. I mean, they were prepared for almost anything. Almost anything, but maybe not everything. What are some of the overlooked clues that the Vildar video highlights as potentially contributing to the disaster?
Well, one thing that often gets overlooked is the decision to leave behind the long-range radio equipment, to make room for more fuel. It made sense in a way, but it also limited their communication range, especially when they needed it most.
Kind of like choosing between a bigger gas tank or a stronger cell phone signal when you're driving through the desert, right? Tough call.
Yeah, exactly. And then there was another incident, maybe during takeoff from Leh, that could have damaged their antenna, which would have made communication with the Itasca even tougher.
So already we're seeing this series of events that could have messed with their navigation and communication. But I'm guessing the real problems started when they got close to Howland Island.
Yeah, and this is where the Vildar video brings up some interesting points. For one, Noonan's celestial navigation, it was probably hampered by overcast skies.
Makes sense. Can't really use a star chart if you can't see the stars.
Right. And then there's a possibility, and this is where it gets really interesting, that their maps were inaccurate.
Wait, inaccurate maps? How is that even possible?
Well, back then, mapping technology wasn't as precise as it is today. Different charts had discrepancies, and even the best maps could have errors, especially in remote areas like the Pacific.
So they're flying over a massive ocean, low on fuel. Communication is iffy at best, and they might not even have the right maps.
It's a recipe for disaster. Right?
Yeah, no kidding. And the video points out that even a small navigational error could have put them way off course, making that tiny island almost impossible to find.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got the stage set for disaster. What happens next?
Well, things go from bad to worse when communication with the Itasca becomes a major problem. We often hear about mismatched time zones as a factor, but what does that actually mean in this situation?
Yeah, that's always confused me. It sounds a bit like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It's simpler than it sounds, but the consequences were anything but simple. Basically, Earhart and the Itasca were on different time zones, leading to a lot of confusion about when they should be communicating.
So they were trying to connect with a ship that was essentially on a different clock. No wonder they had issues.
Right. And on top of the time zone thing, there seems to have been confusion about radio frequencies too. Imagine trying to have a conversation on two different phones that keep getting crossed. It was frustrating and ultimately a fatal breakdown in communication.
So they're lost, low on fuel, and can't connect with the people who are supposed to be guiding them. What happens next?
Well, we have Earhart's radio transmissions getting more and more desperate, giving us this really harrowing picture of their situation. She's reporting low fuel, saying she can't find Howland, and describing her flight path, searching for any sign of land.
I can only imagine that feeling of helplessness, time running out, lost in this huge, unforgiving ocean.
Must have been terrifying. And then, after one last faint message, we must be on you but cannot see you. Silence.
Silence. Talk about a cliffhanger.
Right. So what happens next? Do search parties head out immediately?
I'd assume so, yeah. This was Amelia Earhart, after all.
Oh, absolutely. Her disappearance triggered a massive search effort, unlike anything seen before. 66 aircraft, 9 ships, a $4 million investment, authorized by President Roosevelt himself.
Wow. That's a huge undertaking.
It was. Even George Putnam, Earhart's husband, he searched tirelessly, following every lead, never giving up hope. But despite all their efforts, they found nothing.
Nothing at all. So that's when all the theories started popping up.
You got it. With no trace of the plane, the world was left to speculate. One of the most popular theories involved a photograph, supposedly showing Earhart's plane in Japanese custody. This photo, featured in a documentary called Amelia Earhart, The Lost Evidence, seemed like a huge revelation, It showed a ship towing something that looked a lot like the Electra, fueling speculation that she and Noonan had been captured.
That sounds intriguing, but I have a feeling there's a twist coming.
There is. The photo was debunked pretty quickly. A Japanese blogger traced it back to a 1935 travelogue. It actually predates Earhart's disappearance by 2 years.
Oh, wow. What a letdown.
Right. Talk about a false lead.
So, scratch that theory. But what about the other prominent theory, the one about them landing on Nikumaroro Reef? Didn't a group called TICAR do a lot of research on that?
They did. TICAR, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, they've dedicated a lot of resources to investigate the possibility that Earhart and Noonan landed on Nikumaroro. It's about 350 miles southeast of Howland. And they found some pretty interesting pieces of the puzzle.
Like what kind of pieces? Give me the highlights.
Well, they brought in those forensic bone-sniffing dogs, and the dogs indicated a possible burial site. They even found a partial skeleton back in 1940. An anthropologist, Richard Jantz, analyzed the bones and suggested they could potentially belong to Earhart.
That's pretty compelling. What else?
They found radio distress signals that seemed to line up with low tides on Nikumaroro. Plus, they gathered witness accounts claiming to have heard radio messages from Earhart. And perhaps the biggest point they make is that, based on the fuel calculations, Earhart's plane just wouldn't have had enough fuel to reach any other landmass.
So, is this case closed then? Earhart landed on Nikumaroro and...
Well, hold on. Tikugar's efforts are great, but we gotta look at all this critically, right? Let's unpack their findings and see if they really hold up.
Okay, sounds like we're about to put on our detective hats. Let's do it.
The thing is, TICAR, they have a history of these, really exciting leads that just kind of fizzle out. Remember that metal bookcase they found back in '89? The one they were positive was from the Electra?
Yeah, the grill, right? What happened with that?
Total dead end. Not from the Electra at all. And there have been other finds too, like a woman's shoe, a Freckle cream bottle, a piece of aluminum. None of it definitively linked to Earhart. They even dug up a baby skeleton thinking it might be important, but DNA testing showed it wasn't related.
So, while it's all intriguing, it seems like there's still a lot of speculation involved. How about the bone analysis? Could that be the smoking gun?
Well, that's where it gets a little tricky. Jance's analysis, it suggested a possible match to Earhart, but it's not proof, right? We're talking about a partial skeleton found ages ago, exposed to the elements, with not much data to compare it to.
So even the best evidence is still circumstantial. What about the radio signals and those witness accounts? Are those any more reliable?
The radio signals are interesting, that's for sure, but there's just no way to prove they came from her plane. Back then, radio tech was still pretty new, all sorts of signals bouncing around.
Meaning they could have come from somewhere else entirely.
Exactly. And as for the witness accounts, well, those can be super unreliable, especially after so much time has passed. Memories fade, details get mixed up. Plus, people want to be part of history, that can cloud their judgment.
That makes sense. So being objective, it seems like none of this really proves she landed on Nikumaroro.
Right. It's a great theory, don't get me wrong, but without that solid link, it's still just a theory.
Okay, so we've looked at the Japanese capture theory and the Nikumaroro castaway theory. Both have their good points and their flaws. So where does that leave us? What are we supposed to believe happened to Amelia Earhart?
Well, we have to remember that no definitive proof doesn't mean we dismiss everything. But to be honest, we got to consider the most likely scenario, even if it isn't the most, exciting or satisfying one. And that scenario, well, it's not a happy one.
You're talking about the possibility that she simply ran out of fuel and crashed somewhere in the Pacific.
Yeah. Her radio transmissions showed that fuel was a big worry. Plus, we know that getting to Howland was super tough, even in perfect conditions.
And with all the challenges they faced, the antenna, the maps, the communication issues, it seems more and more likely they just couldn't find that tiny island in time.
Right. And when you consider the Electra's fuel range, the winds out there, the chance of even a small navigation error, it becomes, well, tragically plausible that they ended up lost at sea, hundreds of miles off course.
It's a sobering thought, all that planning, all that skill, all that determination, and it might have come down to just miles, minutes even.
It really shows how unforgiving exploration was, especially back then.
So, while we may never know for sure what happened to Amelia Earhart, the most probable scenario is a tragic one. But that doesn't take away from her incredible story, right?
Not at all. If anything, it makes it even more powerful.
It's almost like her disappearance, it adds another layer to her legacy. She becomes this almost mythical figure, frozen in time, a symbol of courage, ambition.
It's amazing how even in tragedy, her story still connects with people so strongly.
Okay, so what does all this mean for everyone listening? What are the big takeaways from this deep dive into Amelia Earhart?
Well, for one, it's a reminder that even the best laid plans can go wrong. Despite all the preparation, sometimes you get hit with unforeseen stuff, technical problems, even human error, and the consequences can be devastating.
It also makes you think about how important clear communication is. I mean, what if the time zone thing hadn't been an issue? Or if the radio frequencies had matched up perfectly?
It's impossible to say for sure, but things might have turned out differently, right?
And then there's the bigger takeaway, the one that goes beyond this specific mystery. It's about the human spirit, the drive to explore, that unwavering belief that we can achieve anything.
Exactly. Amelia Earhart embodies all of that. And even though her story ends tragically, it still inspires us to dream big, to push ourselves, to never stop exploring.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Even just imagining finding the wreckage opens up a whole new set of questions and challenges.
For sure. It's like, you think you'd get closure, but would you really? Or would it just lead to even more questions and dilemmas?
Right. And that's something the Voldar video touches on, this idea that maybe some mysteries are better left unsolved.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance, right, between wanting to know everything, solve every puzzle, and respecting the past, the people involved.
And it makes you wonder, what's our responsibility to history? Is it to dig up every secret, solve every mystery, or is it sometimes to just let things be?
That's a tough one. And I don't think there's one right answer. It's something everyone has to wrestle with on their own.
But the Voldar video, it at least gets the conversation going. It lays out the different sides of the argument,
Yeah.
Presents them pretty fairly.
Yeah, I think that's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting. It's not just about memorizing facts or rehashing old theories. It's about digging into the complexities, the things we don't know, the ethical stuff. Sometimes the most important thing you learn is that there are more questions than answers.
Absolutely. And that's a valuable lesson, right? In a world that's always pushing for certainty, quick answers, it's good to remember that some mysteries, some questions, they're meant to stick with us, to make us think, to keep us searching.
I like that, to keep us searching. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Amelia Earhart, what are you walking away with? What's sticking with you?
I think for me, it's the idea that even without being here, Amelia Earhart still has this huge impact. Her story reminds us that exploration isn't just about traveling to new places. It's also about expanding what we know, how we think, even how we approach ethical questions.
That's a great way to put it. And for me, it's that reminder that the human spirit, that drive to explore, it's unstoppable. Even when things end tragically, even when we don't have all the answers, there's something so inspiring about that pursuit of the unknown.
I couldn't agree more. And hey, maybe someday, who knows? Maybe technology will advance or we'll get lucky and we'll finally find out exactly what happened to Earhart and Noonan. But until then, their story is going to keep fascinating us, keep challenging us, keep reminding us of how powerful the human spirit can be.
Well said. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the amazing and enduring story of Amelia Earhart. We hope you enjoyed the journey, and we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep seeking knowledge wherever it may lead. Until next time, keep diving deep.